Tinutulungan ko.
Hello, Danica. Can we start?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. And excellent. Thank you. Sorry for a bit of the delay. I think there was one or two accounts that are AI accounts that kept on bugging me on my specific personal comments. So I had to remove those accounts. That's some, the pitfalls of making it all public. So anyway, so thank you, everybody. Good day. It's good morning from London, but I know that you come from different parts of the world. So good day to everybody, and thank you very much for coming to today's conversation. Um, I'm happy that it has actually gained a lot of interest from quite a number of people. When I requested Danica to to come and to have a conversation, Um, I assured her that there won't be any slides involved. That, so that I think the discussion will be as hopefully as informal and as conversational as possible. So, well, first and foremost, I would like to probably, to first introduce Danica a bit to you. You know, of course, that she is the current world English editor of at the Oxford University Press. Um, but actually, you know, historically, as kind of a personal background, Danica and I went to the same university, University of the Philippines, actually the same College of Arts and Letters. But she did her undergraduate degree in European languages, and if I'm not mistaken, majoring in French and Spanish, right? And then move on to take her master's in teaching Spanish as a foreign language at University of Salamanca, and her PhD in applied linguistics at the University of Barcelona. Then from there, she moved to the UK, um, I believe first as a Mellon postdoctoral fellow at Oxford University, right? Up to her current position now as the World English Editor. So first and foremost, maraming salamat, Danica. Thank you very much for saying yes to my request to have a conversation with you.
And well, salamat, Roani. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to collaborate with you and with UCL. And, I'm always up for talking about words.
Okay, thank you. Well, I guess the very first thing is that I'd probably like to ask, and probably sorry, before I ask the first question, please, the comment section is open. So if any question that you would like to pose or any comment or advice or suggestions, please put them in the comment section, and hopefully later on Danica and I will go back to them and and hopefully address them as well. Lexicography, Danica. I think broadly speaking, of course, we are talking about lexicographic work, right? But perhaps to make it a little bit more concrete, talk about it in terms of your own work as a lexicographer. And if I'm not mistaken, you are a historical lexicographer. So I assume that there are many other areas of work in lexicography, but you work more specifically in the context of historical lexicography. So perhaps talk a little bit more about this, and especially through the lens of your own work at the Oxford University Press.
Yes, so as you mentioned, I am currently an editor for Oxford University Press. So I do most of my work specifically for the Oxford English Dictionary. So um, OUP is known for the wide variety of dictionaries it publishes. So there are lots of Oxford branded dictionaries out there. Um, but the Oxford English Dictionary is the flagship dictionary of OUP. And what sets it apart is that it's a historical dictionary. So therefore, the editors who compiled the dictionary are historical lexicographers. So lexicography really just means the activity or the occupation of writing or compiling a lexicon or a dictionary. It's so in other words, it's dictionary. It means dictionary making. Lexicographers are dictionary makers.
Mm-hmm.
And but being the difference with a historical dictionary is that unlike so you know we're familiar with those typical lookup dictionaries where you um, don't know the meaning of something or you're not quite sure about how to pronounce or how to spell a word. So you
Mm-hmm.
take the dictionary and then you look up what it means or how it's pronounced or how it's spelled. But with the historical dictionary, there's an additional use to it in that the purpose of the dictionary is to show the development of a language through the words within the language. So if you consult an entry in the Oxford English Dictionary, it doesn't only show you the definition of the word or its spelling or its pronunciation, but it also shows you the history of the word. So as historical lexicographers, one of our main tasks is to track down the earliest usage of a word in English so that we can record that in the dictionary. So, for example, when people say, "Oh, this word was coined by Shakespeare," then where do you think people get that information? So they get that from the OED because a work by Shakespeare is cited in the OED as the first attested usage of a word,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's also why the OED is a particularly large dictionary. It has 600,000 entries because over 600,000 entries because entries are not usually taken out of the OED. So with dictionaries of current English, once a word is no longer in use, then that word is taken out of later editions of the dictionary because the purpose of those dictionaries is to show current usage. But with the historical dictionary as the OED, even if a word becomes disused or obsolete, they are still kept in the dictionary or they're just labeled as obsolete. But they're still kept because they're still considered to be part of the history of the language. So in the OED, you will not only find the words that we use today, but also words that were used in Old English, in Middle English, in early modern English, and all of these earlier stages of the history of English. So really, it's a dictionary for people who are interested to learn about the history of English.
Mm-hmm. Actually, this came up while you were um, responding to the earlier question, and so sorry for asking this question, because I think you were at some point consultant for Oxford University Press, right? The Oxford Dictionary for World Englishes,
Mhm.
right? Um, I mean, how did this whole change in, I mean, do you think that this has been quite a change in perspective in terms of like what sort of kinds of words get into the dictionary, and the lens is like world Englishes. So now also as a world English editor, is that the same lens that you're also looking at?
Well, it's not necessarily a change in lens in the sense that it's just now that the OED is noticing
Mm-hmm.
World English
Mm-hmm.
words.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that the OED naturally has to respond to changes in 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 how English is used, in changes in the culture, in changes in the existing linguistic scholarship, in changes in technology, right? So the OED started out in the 19th century, right? The
Mm-hmm.
first installment of the dictionary was published in 1884.
Mm-hmm.
And the complete first edition was published in 1928. So that's almost 100 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So of course, 100 years ago or 150 years ago, there was no notion of world Englishes. English was already, present in many different parts of the world, but the context was totally different, right? And it wasn't really until the mid 20th century in the 1960s, 1970s when former colonial nations started becoming independent nations who have decided that that they would be keeping the English language, that this notion of world Englishes, as we talk about it today, became understood, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and then also at the time, but even having said that, like the word abaka, which is a Filipino word, was included in the first fascicle of the OED, the first installment, so that in 1884, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that I think it's, if you consult the first edition of the OED now, it's on page 3, right? So one of the earliest incarnations of the OED, there has been a Philippine Filipino word, but we couldn't at that time still call it a Philippine English word because in 1884, Filipinos didn't you speak English. We were still a Spanish colony then. So even though there's a Filipino word, abaka, it was included in the OED not because of that Philippine English element, but because Abaka is a product from the Philippines that was very important at the time in the
Mm-hmm.
industry during the time of during the Victorian era where there were still no materials for synthetic ropes. So Abaka was a very important material for the empire at the time. So the reasons for including certain words in the OED were different depending on which period of the dictionary you're looking at. So now, and another thing is that we're just able to add more World English words now because now that there are all these places in the world where English is being spoken as a second or third language, and all these world Englishes are developing or continuing to develop. But we're also now more able to add these words because of changes in technology, right?
Mhm.
So before, when you were writing the OED, you necessarily had to rely on books or newspapers that had to be shipped to Oxford from different parts of the world. But now OED editors, just because of the internet, we're able to have access to all different kinds of texts from different parts of the world. We are able to analyze them computationally. So we have tools right now as modern day lexicographers that our Victorian predecessors didn't
Mhm.
have. So that
Mhm.
those are the factors that go into what the ways, the different ways that the OED have covered what we would consider has covered what we would consider world Englishes today.
Mhm. By the way, how often does the dictionary, I mean Oxford Dictionary here, of course, I mean,
Mm,
get updated? I mean, like, no, I mean, this kind of conversation, I think it was triggered by,
mm,
the latest round of
yes.
entries, right? How do you, I mean, how does it get updated? Like, is it
Yeah.
something like a yearly thing, or
Yeah.
when
So
there's like a deluge of new words that
no.
are kind of,
So the OED updates are regular. So
okay.
they happen like clockwork. They happen in 4 times a year. So they are quarterly updates. So the dictionary is updated um in March. So that's the update that we just had right now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
March, April, no, not April, March, June, September, and December. So those are the four
Okay.
OED updates per year. And when we talk about updates, we're not just talking about new words, so
All
words that
right.
have never been in the dictionary and they're just being added. We're also talking about revision. So there
Okay.
are words that are already in the OED, but they haven't been looked at for a considerable amount of time. So then they are revised to make sure that the entry follows, modern standards of historical lexicography. So that's why we have to update the OED very regularly, because it's a continuous process of revision, of addition and revision. Now, when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to world Englishes, currently the OED in so in every quarterly OED update, there is a certain set of world English varieties that are updated within that
Mm-hmm.
update. So for instance, in March is when the OED updates its entries, its coverage of Southeast Asian Englishes. So that includes Philippine English, Singapore English, Malaysian English, and it's also when the OED updates Irish English and South African English.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why all of these new words that people have been talking about recently were added to the OED in March. And then in a few months' time, in June, we'll have another update. And that one will include updates from Scottish English and Canadian English and Australian
Mm-hmm.
English.
Mm-hmm.
And then in September, there will be another set of varieties and another set of varieties in December. So we do it that way to ensure
Yeah.
that every major variety covered by the OED is updated at least once a year.
Uh-huh.
So for
Uh-huh.
Filipinos, we can expect to have updates for Philippine English every year in March.
Okay. So, well, I guess now I'm now it makes me even more curious because the updates seem to be very, very regular. But what seems to have been, I mean, the most recent update seems to have like had like so much media coverage, right? I
Yeah.
I mean, why? I mean, I mean, what is it? Do you think? I mean, what was the interest in it? Like, I know giggle, right, in Philippine English, but I know that you have been. I mean, there are many other words, not just actually from Philippine English, right, but also even Singapore English too. But somehow, because as what you said, it's a pretty regular kinds of updates. But this one seems to have like
Yeah.
taken on quite a life of its own. So why do you
Yeah,
think?
the OED is quite a well-known dictionary, so the media is always interested in what we do. So every
Mm-hmm.
time we do a quarterly update, we do a press release,
Mm-hmm.
and then we send it out to the media, and then we see what happens, right? And so so the media coverage, I'm quite used to that. It's a regular thing that happens. So it's part of my job to kind of do media interviews and things like that. But I do agree that this particular March update was quite exceptional in the amount of, usually if we get one with world Englishes, we always try to approach local media with our with the press release. So if we're updating South African English, then we alert the South African media, and Singapore English, we alert the Singapore media. And usually we get, one or two articles in local newspapers, maybe an article on the BBC or the Guardian or something like that. But so that's the normal. But but in this last update, yeah, it was quite a big deal. There were like what, five articles on the BBC, and I think
Alone,
it's,
right?
yeah, and I think it's largely because of Giggle, I think. So
Uh-huh.
so one thing is that there was a lot of interest, like in Singapore, for instance, on the Singapore English words, in Malaysia on the Malaysian English words. So that's wonderful. But the thing that really became viral and became global, international, was Giggle. And I think it's because of its status as an untranslatable word. So it's that concept of untranslatable
Yeah,
word
yeah,
that really
yeah.
caught people's attention. And also just the meaning of giggle itself, because that feeling of giggle, that feeling of wanting to squeeze a really cute person or animal, everybody knows what that feeling is. And but we're just not quite sure what to call it. So to
Yeah.
suddenly have a word that you could use for it, so it's just something that really resonated with a lot of people, even those who are not familiar with the Philippines or Philippine English at all. And
Mhm.
that's what really caused the whole media um
Yeah.
interest in the word.
So the spotlight is on Giggle, right? And actually also when I was reading the articles about it, and that's, I think you're right. The angle is the fact that
Mm.
these words get into the dictionary because they are untranslatable
Mm.
into English. I wonder what you think about it as a lexicographer. I mean, it, and on the one hand, I think, because of the wide coverage, it somehow somehow the interest of a lot of people, but at the same time somehow limited the understanding of of how words actually get chosen, or get into the dictionary, right? But the focus is on, like, because they are untranslatable, then they get into the dictionary.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I feel a little bit responsible because I mean, because I wrote, because I one of my jobs as well is to write the release notes. So every time we do World English updates, I write an article that's later posted and is available publicly on the OED website.
Hmm.
And that's where I talk about which varieties are being updated and what words are included in it. And then I talk about what the words are, what they mean. And Ruani, I have to write these things 4 times a year, right? So each time I have to think, okay, so these are the words that I have. So how can I start this article in an interesting way? What's the common thread among all of these words, so you can make a because you can't just put a random list, right? You have to
Yeah,
put
yeah.
something here. So I thought, oh, we have giggle in this batch, and giggle is always, in the newspapers being, people love these listicles of untranslatable words. And I noticed that giggle is always one of them. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe that could be a good hook for this article, is to
Mm,
say that, because
mm,
that it is true. I mean, that a lot of the time, so in the vocabulary of world Englishes, borrowing is one of the primary means of the creation of new words in world Englishes, because with world Englishes you usually have English being in constant contact with other languages spoken by the community, and naturally that contact results in the exchange of words between these languages. So English absorbs words from so if in Philippine English, so English absorbs words from Filipino and other Philippine languages, right? That's just not can be expected. So and a lot of that borrowing is motivated by this untranslatability. There are just some words that you feel like you can express better in a word from your other language than in English. So therefore you borrow it just for just for the efficiency of it, and giggle is one of them. But the irony of it is that I really think untranslatable is a misnomer, because I don't believe that any word is untranslatable. I mean, a skilled translator will find ways to translate anything, right? But what when we say untranslatable, it just means that a word doesn't have a one-to-one equivalent in one language in another. So that's what we mean by that. So I just feel that that kind of, although I explained in the article, that kind of got lost. And then people started to think that, oh, the OED identified this feeling as being as something, giggle as a feeling that there's no existing word for it in English, and therefore the OED decided, okay, this word from Tagalog is going to be the word for it, and now all and now we've chosen it, and now everyone in the English speaking world now should use this word giggle to talk about this feeling. But that's not the case at all. We added giggle not because we want people to use it, but because people already use it.
Mm-hmm.
Only that these people are in the Philippines. So
Mm-hmm.
Filipinos use the word giggle when they speak in English. And that alone is enough reason for this word to be added to the OED. So giggle completely was added to the OED as a Philippine English word.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because we're trying to make giggle happen or we're trying to make Americans or British people use giggle. No. It's
Mm-hmm.
because Filipinos already use it. And if because of this virality, it spreads to the rest of the world and begins to be used by other people outside of the Philippines, that's great. That's fine. But that's not the reason why we added it to the dictionary. We added it because we found sufficient evidence that giggle has
Mm.
been used in the Philippines in English since for the past 30 years at least.
Okay. All right. So now, I mean, it's great that you mentioned that we've found sufficient evidence, right? So now I think we're talking about the process. I mean, I'd like to ask about the process now of how certain um sorry, anyone please can you mute yourselves? Okay, thank you. Um So I mean the process, right? I mean there are countless of probably words like not just in Philippine English but in other Englishes as well that are also being currently being used by specific communities and specific groups of people. So I guess what I'm interested in, probably many of us here are also interested in, is like what's the process? Like for example, with a particular word like giggle, right? How does it become, let's say, a candidate for
Mm.
for consideration, in other words, and not why this and another word. And actually later on, I'm also interested in like, for example, you started to research on a particular word, but halfway through you said it's not going to happen. I mean, it's not going to work. So what made you decide probably not to continue with it, and why not another, or why the other another word, and then eventually making it to the dictionary?
Right. So there, so in the OED, we have many different ways to track the emergence of new words and new senses of words, and of course the now the primary way that we track these new words is through the use of a corpus. So all of you who have done applied linguistics or any sort of applied linguistics research would be familiar with the term. So basically, a corpus is just a collection, a digital collection of text that is designed specifically for linguistic research. So we've got what in the OED we've got what we call a monitor corpus.
Hmm.
So it's huge. So it's a corpus with literally billions of words with a B. And we add to it every month. So it's already big, but it gets bigger and bigger. And we have software that we use to track the frequencies of words in this dictionary. So this corpus is what we use not only for the OED but also for the current dictionaries that are published by OUP. So we use this corpus to see, okay, which words um are being used with sufficient frequency that, you know, and if it's not yet in the dictionary, maybe we should consider adding it. And this corpus also has specific segments that represent different varieties of English. So we have the option to look to isolate, you know, like say just the Philippine English text in the corpus, or just the New Zealand English text, and see which words are particularly frequent in these varieties in comparison to other varieties, and therefore that's an indication to us that this word or this sense is a specific characteristic or specific lexical item from that variety of English. So of course, frequency is an important factor for us in looking at possible candidates. And then, but apart from that, we also work with local. So we
Mm,
look at
mm,
the current scholarship, you know what, because other like linguists also do work on the lexicon of world Englishes. So we see if there's anything published that sort of indicate certain words that we need to look at. If there are also dictionaries of this particular varieties, we see what what they have in their coverage that maybe we don't have. And then we also work with local experts in those varieties who give us their suggestions of which words we should be looking at. And we do crowdsourcing as well. Like on the OED website, there's a form there where you can suggest words that come from your variety so that the OED can consider adding them to the
mm,
dictionary as well. And
mm,
now, once we have a list of candidates, and we do even more research on both print and online resources to see if there's sufficient evidence of the word being used over time.
mm,
And
mm,
if we get that, you know, convincing evidence, then the word gets added to the dictionary and the entry is created.
mm.
And if we
Yeah, actually,
don't get
yeah.
sufficient evidence, then we don't we park the word. So we never say this word will never enter the dictionary ever again. We just say we don't have sufficient evidence at the moment, but maybe in the future we can have a look again,
Mm,
and maybe the
mm.
situation will be different.
Yeah, I mean, I have comments here, like from Kim, De Castro. You probably have addressed it already, but probably, I don't know whether you want to continue with it. Are there specific corpora or research collaborations that OED uses to source lexical data from non-native English-speaking countries? I think you've already, if I'm not sure whether there's something that you want to add on to that.
Yeah. Yeah, so as mentioned, yeah, we work with consultants on different varieties of English with every update that we do. And then a specific corpora, it's just we would love to be able to use specific corpora, but there aren't really that many. And even those existing corpora for world Englishes, they are tiny. You know, they could be so for instance, you've got the International Corpus of English, you know, a very good corpus of different varieties of English that has been around for a long time, but they have just like a million words per variety. And for lexicography, that's just absolutely tiny. So it's good for grammatical studies, and a lot, it's the corpus is good for a lot of things. But if you want to use a corpus
Mhm,
specifically for dictionary making, you need it to be really big, because the bigger the corpus, uh, the more possibilities, the more varied the words. Because we're looking at content words here, not just function words. So you really need a big corpus to find words with enough frequency. So that's the only thing that's keeping us from using other existing World English corpora, because we haven't found one that's really quite big enough for our purposes. But really trying to see how we can collaborate with external partners so we can build, you know,
mhm,
work together in building such large corpora of uh, of World Englishes, and ideally with a historical component as well. So that's something
mhm.
that we're looking forward to working on in future.
Mhm. SC Harvard also in the comment
Mm.
section, as well as frequency, does a word have to be used over a specific or minimum length of time before it's included? She thinks I mean, I think I read in John Simpson's memoir that a word had to be used for 10 years before it was considered to be added to the OED. but wondered if that had changed based on technological advances, internet, and so
Yeah.
on and so forth.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and well done for reading John Simpson's memoir. It's a really good book if you guys want to learn about what it's like to be a lexicographer for the OED. Read that. That's a really good book. And because John Simpson was a former chief editor of the OED. Yeah, it it is true. So what Chan said is true. So we have like kind of that rule of thumb that a word has to have been used in English for at least 10 years for it to be added to the OED. Because, every word that is added to the OED entails a lot of research, a lot of work. So you just have to make sure that, the words that you're adding have some sort of staying power and not just some flash in the pan word that will disappear and will probably not have that much impact on the history of English. But the thing is now, because of advances in technology and with the world being much more connected, because of the internet, because of messaging services and all that sort of thing, it's not words are spreading around the word the world and becoming established in the vocabulary much faster than it used to be. So someone could do a TikTok right now in India, and then the video becomes viral, and then a word that's become viral will suddenly start to be used in Australia or in Singapore and everywhere else, and then it becomes a thing so much faster than it used to be before. So sometimes we find ourselves having to break that rule of thumb. So it's there, the rule is there, but it's not so hard. And so for us, really, the important thing is the evidence. And if we find sufficient evidence, even before that 10-year mark is reached, then we can. So there's one very extreme example of us breaking this rule, and that was in 2020 when we added COVID-19 to the OED in April 2020, when the word was coined by the World Health Organization only in February 2020. So it took like, what, 3 months. So that's
Mm,
probably the record of the fastest because it made sense, right? It doesn't need any more time for the word COVID-19 didn't need any more time to prove that it was an important word that needed to be recorded in historical dictionary. So we decided not to wait and just to add it immediately. But of course, that's an extreme example. And hopefully we'll never see a similar one again.
yeah. Yes. So, okay. They, I my first encounter with not really first encounter, but when I was in Singapore, because I taught and lived in Singapore for 20 years, and I remember I don't know when this one was, more than probably a decade ago. There was just this huge, I mean, the same sort of like updates on new entries, right? And there was, in a sense, a lot of talk about these new entries from Singapore English. All right. And I think if I'm not mistaken, even the government stepped in and and made its own presence felt, in the process of doing so. Um, this and many others. I mean, in your experience, perhaps can you share with us some of these controversies and why there are certain, like, controversial um entries, if you call them that, and how you dealt with them.
Yeah, well, actually, it's funny that you bring that up because that Singapore experience is also quite unforgettable for me personally and quite instructive for me, an important event in my formation as and in my development as a lexicographer, because that Singapore English project was only this my second one as an actual editor in the UD, because that happened in 2016. And
Okay.
before that, my
Mm.
first project was Philippine English. It was
Mm.
that came out in 2015. It was a huge success. That was the update with Kilig in it, and and everybody, it was so positively received in the Philippines. And I naively assumed that, if I just do the same thing as I did with the Philippine English project, with the Singapore English project, then it will be as well received over there,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
it wasn't.
yeah, yeah,
And it
yeah.
wasn't. So it was really an awakening for me that, that, oh, you really, really have to. And also remember that before this, I was in the academe. So I have a very academic background. And it was really with this project that I realized that, oh, I'm making dictionaries now. And dictionaries are used by people outside of the academe. It's something that goes out to the public and goes out to people who may not have the same knowledge and background as me in linguistics and in world Englishes, right? So so it was so anyway, as you said, the reception in Singapore wasn't as rapturous as it was in the Philippines, because the context is totally different. Like in the Philippines, we know Oxford, of course, we were familiar with it. We know that it's an important dictionary, but we don't have any historical connection to it.
Emotional attachment,
We
right?
don't if we don't have an attachment to it. We just know that
Yeah.
it's important, and if our words are recorded in it accurately, great, good for us, well done, Philippines, right? But in Singapore, the relationship to the Oxford brand is totally different. So to them, it's a representation of a lot of other things, and it's so tied up with their colonial past and how they view themselves today and how they wish to project themselves as a nation. um, and 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 at first I was, confused. Why? And then I realized that, oh, it's because before this update, Singaporeans had this clear divide between,
Mm,
Singlish, what is Singlish? So
yeah.
Singlish is the thing that you can use with your friends and family at home. That's
Mm-hmm.
fine. And then proper English
Mm-hmm.
is what you
Mm-hmm.
use in school, what you use at work, and it's what you're supposed to be able to use.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then for the OED to come out and say, no, actually,
Yeah. It
these
breaks
words that
down.
used to be
Yeah.
just in Singlish, we're now putting it in the Oxford English Dictionary. So that suddenly blurred all those lines that used to
Yes.
be clear
Yes.
before.
Yeah.
And it has a matter of
Okay,
practical
thank you.
importance for Singaporeans because there are examinations that they have
Mm-hmm.
to pass in order to get to good schools, in order to get and after that get good jobs. And to pass those exams for English, it used to be just, learn the words that are in the Oxford Dictionary and not the ones in Singlish. So blurring those lines is a practical concerns and caused a lot of anxiety over there. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it was really just a matter of really explaining all that and understanding, why are there these negative reactions.
Mm-hmm.
Of course we stand by our decision to add Singapore English words because they do, the words that we've added did pass, the inclusion criteria of the OED. But when communicating these additions to the public, we have to be sensitive
Mm-hmm.
to the local context and explain. And a few months after that controversy, I read that there was in the news in the Straits Times that the Ministry of Education of Singapore said that students could use Singlish words in their
Mm-hmm.
examinations if they're used in the right context. So I'm not saying that the OED had a direct hand in that, but I'm hoping that the discussion that followed the addition of Singapore English words to the OED kind of made people more open-minded in Singapore about how to
Mm-hmm.
approach variation in English. Um,
Yes, yes, yeah, you're right. Because I mean, I was supposed to also mention what you earlier mentioned. I mean, there was, you know, when the words came in, th- there was like a sudden blurring of this distinction because coming from, let's say, I taught in two universities, right? And especially in the second one, is a teacher training, National Institute of Education, and so it's really very very clear what gets into the classroom and what is not allowed in the classroom. Of course, ideologically speaking, I mean, all of these things are in the classroom anyway,
exactly.
right? But then the Oxford University, I mean Oxford Dictionary comes in and then begins, to talk about these um, what they call this new words, and so somehow that distinction has somehow fallen flat, basically. And so now, I mean, the question is now, so what happens? I mean, even in my own, say, social linguistics class, all right, um, students were then asking me, like, so can we use it? Can we now? Because the idea of the dictionary, the Oxford Dictionary, is supposed to be the legitimate source of how English language use should be like, right? And then here you are bringing in colloquial uses of the English language, and in a sense, with a lot of those indexicalities that are negative in connotation, right, and so on and so forth. So, which actually now brings me to these, contentious questions about, basically the gatekeeping function of Oxford Dictionary. I mean, you did make references to that in this context, right? That somehow, the gatekeeping functions of the dictionary, are very much in place in practices and processes like this one. So I wonder what how do you view um, practices, that come from your own work as a world English of editor, bringing in, words from different parts of the world, for example, the different Englishes in a sense, right? And how do these things play out in the context of the fact, really, that, the Oxford Dictionary is still, a gatekeeping institution.
We always try to say that the OED doesn't it's not a supposed it's not supposed to be a gatekeeping institution. It's supposed to be a reference work for people who want to learn about the history of English. That's
Okay.
only what it's supposed to be. And that is the fact that but at the same time, we cannot take away so that in an ideal world, people will understand that and
Mm-hmm.
know that they shouldn't use the OED as a gatekeeper or as an arbiter of
Mm-hmm.
correctness or anything like that. But in the real world that we are living in, because of the name, because of its prestige, the OED does have that role. People do
Mm-hmm.
perceive it as such. So we also have to acknowledge that, that our actual purpose is not does not always match what purpose the
Mm-hmm.
general public gives to us, right? So I think the best thing that we can do to address that is just to use that influence for good, to start to acknowledge that we do have that influence and say that, no variety of English needs validation from the OED or any other dictionary. All validation comes from the people who use these varieties, right? But it is also true that for some people, the very idea that you could take a dictionary or go to a dictionary website and find the words that you use in there, that means something. It means a lot to people
Mm-hmm.
to be able to say, hey, my word is in the dictionary. If someone corrects them, they could say, oh, if you go to the OED, you will see my word is in there, spelled this way and pronounced this way. So we do have that role, and that in itself is valuable. Just like what happened with Singapore, that the OED is a dictionary that people talk about that
Mm-hmm.
has a certain degree of influence. So if that influence can be used so that we can open up these conversations about what is a native speaker, what do we
Mm-hmm.
even mean by that, what does it mean for words to be included in a dictionary, and
Mm-hmm.
and I can see that happening now. I remember a couple of years ago my cousin sent me a link to this Twitter word war happening on social media because there was this one guy complaining about a Philippine English word. I can't even remember what it was. But so I was dreading to look at this Twitter thread because but actually when I saw it, I was so surprised that people were criticizing this person who was complaining and saying, no, that word is a Philippine English word, so you can't complain about it. And a lot of the people said, look, you can even check the OED, it's on there. So they're even
Yeah.
using OED evidence to even so we're not talking about students who are studying linguistics or or people who are researching world Englishes. No, it's
Mm-hmm.
just normal everyday people saying, no, we're tired of being criticized for the words that we're using. And look, even the Oxford English Dictionary is backing us up. So I think that's one role we can play is just to give people confidence
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
use their words and make them feel like they're really. part of an established language community, and that the words that they're using is as valid as words that they're used by British people or American people when they use English. So when I get feedback like that from people who say, "Oh, I just like one of like I just found these words in the OED and I was so excited. Told my friends and my family, and they were so excited to see the words too." So I think that's for us, that's the validation, right? When people say that the words that are documented in the OED are the actual words that they use, and they appreciate it being recorded in the dictionary and being given its place in the history of the language, because that's really what all of this is for,
Mm,
right?
mhm. Yeah.
And also for people who want to do research on Philippine English or other varieties of English, now you can use the OED to do that as well, because every entry that we have for all these varieties of English in the OED, they have gone through a very exhaustive research process. So all of that information can go into further research on the lexicon
Mhm.
of English. And that's an important way to, because when we say that, oh, giggle, when we added giggle to the OED, we didn't just say, oh, giggle is a word, or that this is how it's pronounced, this is how it's spelled. We're also saying we have evidence of giggle being used as early as 1990.
Mhm.
It's been
Mhm.
used in the English language for 30 years. So that,
Mhm.
and we have that same type of information for all of the hundreds of other Philippine English words that we have in the dictionary. So, you can use that evidence to do further work on the lexicon of Philippine English as well.
Yes, there are a few things in the comments, like Ashley Nicole. I mean, something interesting here. I mean, she's asking about. I think she's because we're talking about borrowed words, right? And she's asking about etymological shifts as well, right? Like I think probably like the use of a particular word but has a certain, if I get it right, that has a certain angle that's a different now. Um, do I mean do you track these shifts as well? I mean changes in the meaning of the same word, for example.
Yes, yes, yes,
That's right.
definitely. We do that. So that's why we're doing continuous revision. And borrowed words are treated in exactly the same way as
Mm,
words with English elements.
yeah. Okay. Thank you. Um, the Catalin here also asking, she asking, like, I wonder why people need the authorization, authorization by Oxford English Dictionary to use English as it is used in their communities. This seems to me to be internalized
Yeah.
oppression.
Well, this is a good question, and I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts about this, Romani. You study this, but for me personally, I think we should stop beating ourselves up over it. It's not us. Sometimes I think that when we discuss these things, it's always, oh, it's just that Filipinos have this persistent colonial mentality. It's just we don't love our languages enough. We don't love ourselves enough. It's as if it's still our fault, like it's an internal thing that we have, but it's not just that. It's because it's the world. It's the world that's making us like this. It's society, everything. Like, so just to give an example, so sadly, like this weekend, I was in hospital for not
Mhm.
a serious procedure, but I was taken care of by this lovely Filipino nurse, of course, because it was a British hospital. So so that's what you can expect. And she's actually from Aklan, from our
Oh, really?
hometown,
Okay.
yeah.
All
And
right.
she
Yeah.
just such a wonderful nurse. And she said, when she was telling me about her process of coming to the UK to work as a nurse, she said that the hardest part for her was the English exam. And I was like, huh? And she spoke the most perfect English, like Philippine English, but perfect Philippine English. We had absolutely no problem communicating either in Tagalog or English. And I was in the ward, so I could hear her communicating with the other patients. Absolutely no issue at all. But here she was telling me, oh, I'm so intimidated by the exam. And,
Mm,
and that's what I mean, it's because every time we're told by society that our English is not good enough, if we want to go work abroad, we have to do all of these tests just to prove that we're English speakers. I myself, when I came to the UK, because I had a job offer from the Oxford English Dictionary and from the Faculty of English of the Oxford University, I was asked to do an exam
mm,
to
mhm.
show, so they could give me a visa. So
Well,
I had to prove that I spoke English, even though I was coming here with a job offer from the Oxford English
yeah.
Dictionary.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
that level of absurdity that
yeah.
Filipinos have to go through all the time. So
Mm,
could you blame us if we have this kind of
yeah,
attitude?
yeah,
So it's not, it's all this history, this colonial baggage, and it's not just the colonial baggage, it's also what's happening right now. And you know, it's interesting that language is the one area of life right now that where it's almost acceptable to be discriminatory and racist.
yeah.
Like,
That's right.
it's
Yeah,
still
you're right.
okay to laugh at people for their accents. It's still okay
Exactly.
to withhold job opportunities to people because they don't pass language exams.
Mm,
So
mm,
that's that's where all this is coming from,
yeah,
and that's
yeah.
why, Ruani, you do this. The work that you do is to, see how we can fight this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. No, no,
Yeah.
the same thing with me. I was coming in already for a job to teach in graduate studies at UCL. I had my PhD in English language, and yet I was still asked to prove my English language proficiency by
Mm.
taking IELTS. you know
Yes, exactly.
so I was telling I kept on telling my students, if you took IELTS, I also had to take IELTS. But I think you're right. I think it's part of then this feeling of always
Pressure.
wanting to prove,
Mm.
precisely because of it likes all these institutional and ideological demands from all of us. Anyway, I'd like to somehow end up with something kind of slight. I don't know whether how much you can actually share openly,
Mm.
but what are the next words that we should be in the lookout for? Not just, of course, probably in Philippine English, probably in some other Englishes as well. Are there some of those that might be up and coming in the dictionary?
Okay. Well, we always say, we try not to say,
Okay.
oh, watch out in the next
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
update
yeah,
because you'll
yeah.
see this word, because you never know between publication and between, editing and publication. It's a lot. It's a long, as I hope I've been able to describe, it's a long process.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And sometimes it sometimes it doesn't work out. So, but I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
I can say it's by way of, so just so you won't think that I'm dodging your questions, I
yeah.
could give you a
No,
little
it doesn't have to be like for sure it's going to be there, but being
yeah, but
considered.
I can explain this also by giving you an example. So
Okay, all
in
right.
the March update, we were also supposed to have boodle fight,
Oh,
which is
okay.
such a
All
really
right.
cool
Boodle fight. Yes,
word.
that's right.
So the whole entry had been edited and it had gone through all of the different stages, and but then at one of those later stages we found that, oh, we needed to do further work on the word boodle itself, because the
Mm,
boodle in boodle fight comes from this American English military
mm,
slang term, and we do have an entry for it, but needed a bit more work in order to fill that gap, because we have to tell that whole story. So how did it go from boodle in 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 the US
military.
Army to
Yeah.
boodle fights in the Philippines? So there were
Yeah.
still, so we found that there's a gap there in that whole lexical
So,
development that still needed to be filled. So although the entry for boodle fight was ready to go, so it had to be held back so that we could work on the related entry. So it's likely then that since we've had time to work on that, that Moodle fight will be in next year's March update.
mm,
But you
mm,
never know
mm.
if
Yeah.
something
Right.
else might come up
All
again.
right.
But
Yeah.
if things going as they should, then you should be able to expect Boodle fight in March 2026. So we'll see.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Yeah. I think it's, quite short, but very, very productive, I think, exchange. So, um, first and foremost, again, thank you very much, Danica, for giving us the time to somehow, in a sense, demystify the work. Not just looking at the words and how they are now, in the dictionary, but the process behind it and the thinking behind it. So, maraming salamat. Thank you very much. And
Mhm.
to everybody, more than 100 of you here who stayed on, maraming salamat. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good day, have a good evening, and enjoy the rest of the week as well. Thank you.
Okay, salamat.
Salamat. Bye bye.
Bye.